How are you guys doing? It is Monday, October 19th, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to take you through yesterday's Elite performances from Sunday, October 18th. Of course, starting with the biggest game of last night, Game 7 of the NLCS, and of course, I'll just ease your way through of everything yesterday and everything to look forward to today. But of course, like I just said, we'll get started with last night's Game 7, the last game of the National League Championship Series. And in this game, after the Braves led the series 3-1 and the Dodgers won the last two, the Dodgers would win Game 7 to advance to the World Series to play against the Tampa Bay Rays. Looking out to last night's game, how both teams played. For the Atlanta Braves, or just looking out to how it went, the Braves would score runs in the first two innings. It would be Marcell Ozuna with an RBI single in the top of the first, and then Dansby Swanson hit a home run in the second to make it 2-0. Then Will Smith would bring two home on a single, tying it up at 2 in the fourth inning. The Braves would go up again with Austin Riley's single, making it 3-2. In the sixth, Kike Hernandez would tie it up, and then Cody Bellinger would hit a home run in the seventh inning to put them above, just like he did 2 years ago in Game 7 of the NLCS to send the Dodgers to the World Series. But looking at how both teams fared, for the Atlanta Braves, their starting pitcher was Ian Anderson. They're young, amazing young rookie who would only pitch 3 innings. He'd allow 2 earned runs in those innings, striking out 2. But then it would mostly go to the bullpen. Shane Green would hold it, but AJ Minter would be the one that blew the save after his amazing start. I think it was either yesterday or 2 days ago. But looking at how the Braves offense fared in their final game of the 2020 season, their elite right fielder Ronald Acuna Jr. would go 0 for 3 as he walked once, but he finished with a run. Their elite first baseman Freddie Freeman, who more than likely is going to end up winning the MVP. He finished 0 for 3 with a walk on the day. Their designated hitter, Marcell Ozuna, who ended up leading the league in home runs and RBIs, finished 1 for 4 with an RBI on the day. Their elite second baseman, Ozzie Albies, would go 0 for 2 as he walked twice and finished with a run. Their shortstop, Dansby Swanson, would go 1 for 3 with an RBI and a run. He hit his first and only home run of the series last night. Their third baseman, Austin Riley, would go 1 for 4 with an RBI, and he was the player with the last at-bat of the game, and I think I think he flew out. And then looking at how the Los Angeles Dodgers fared, Dustin May would get the start. He would allow 1 earned run in the first inning, and he would strike out 1. And then it would go to bullpen pitching, and the win would go to Julio Urias, who is now 2-0 in the series. He would allow no earned runs in 3 innings pitched. Big win for the Dodgers. As we look to their offense, their elite right fielder, Mookie Betts, would go 2 for 4. Their NLCS MVP, Corey Seager, would go 0 for 5, but he still had an amazing series. Their third baseman, Justin Turner, would go 0 for 2. He walked twice and still finished with a run. Their first baseman, Max Muncy, would go 1 for 4 with the run as he struck out 3 times. Their catcher, Will Smith, would go 1 for 4 with 2 RBIs. Their elite center fielder in 2018 National League MVP, Cody Bellinger, would go 1 for 2 with an RBI and a run as he walked twice, and he ended up hitting his second home run of the series. Their pinch hitter, Kike Hernandez, would go 1 for 2 with an RBI and a run. He hit his second home run of the series, and Chris Taylor, their second baseman, will go 2 for 4 on the day. Like I said, with this win, the Los Angeles Dodgers will advance to play the Tampa Bay Rays in the World Series. Game 1 of the World Series is tomorrow, as in the 60-game season, the two teams that finished number 1 in their conferences or in their leagues after winning 40 games are going to face off against each other in the World Series. It's going to be a big one. It's going to be the Tampa Bay Rays and the Los Angeles Dodgers starting tomorrow at 8:09 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Without further ado, jumping right into international soccer to let you know what's going on out there before I jump to football, because yesterday was Sunday. There was a good amount of soccer to be played in general. Starting off with the Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur, they went up 3-0 in the first 16 minutes as Son Heung-min would score in the very first minute, and Harry Kane would score in the 8th and 16th minute. But West Ham United would come back with 3 goals in the final 10 minutes added on to extra time, as both teams would end up going to a draw. And following this draw, Tottenham currently sits 6th in the Premier League with 2 wins, 2 draws, and a loss. They have 8 points in 5 games. They have the same amount of points as Chelsea, but they have a better goal differential. That's where Tottenham's sitting right now. That was the only crazy big game of yesterday as we look throughout the leagues, and then looking forward to today. Not crazy big matchups in soccer, but of course it's coming as Champions League. The first games of Champions League start tomorrow. And then last but not least, jumping into NFL football just to show you what's going on in week 6 before we get into tonight's games. Starting with the early games, the Atlanta Falcons are now 1-5 after beating the Minnesota Vikings 40-23 and not blowing a lead. They would score 10 points in all quarters. They would hold the Vikings scoreless in the first half. The Vikings would outscore the Falcons in the second half, but it would be too late. For them, Kirk Cousins would throw for 343 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Through the air, Justin Jefferson was their leading receiver. He had 166 yards on 9 receptions and 2 touchdowns on the day. And then on defense, Eric Kendricks from UCLA would lead the team in tackles. He had 14 on the day. Ifeanyi Odenigbo finished with a sack and a half for the Minnesota Vikings as well. And looking at how the Atlanta Falcons fared, their elite quarterback Matt Ryan would complete 30 of his 40 passes for 371 yards and 4 touchdowns. On the ground, their elite running back Todd Gurley II would finish with 47 yards and 20 carries. He also had 20 yards on 3 receptions through the air, giving him 67 yards on 23 touches. Through the air, their elite receiver Julio Jones would finish with 137 yards on 8 receptions and 2 touchdowns. And the second of which was pretty amazing. Matt Ryan had to ad-lib a play on 4th down and kind of found him. I know that because I watched the game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, A.J. Terrell would lead the team in tackles. He had 7 of them, and he also had an interception on the day. Deion Jones and Foyesade Olaku would also finish with interceptions on the day. And then Allen Bailey would finish with the sole sack of the day for the Atlanta Falcons. And with this win, the Atlanta Falcons are now 1-5 on the season, just like the Minnesota Vikings now with this loss. Jumping out to New England, the Patriots hosted the Denver Broncos, and the Broncos were able to beat the New England Patriots 18-12 after scoring 6 points in the first 3 quarters. They just kind of kept it out of reach. For the New England Patriots, their elite quarterback Cam Newton, coming back from COVID, quarantining. Through the air, he finished with 157 yards and completing 17 of his 25 passes. He threw for 2 interceptions as well. And on the ground, he had 76 yards and 10 carries with a touchdown. Through the air, James White would be the leading receiver. He had 65 yards and 8 receptions. And looking at the defensive side of the ball, Jawan Bentley had a pretty good game. He had 12 tackles. 2.5 of them were in the backfield. And then J.C. Jackson and Jonathan Jones would get the interceptions on the day for the Patriots. Looking at how the Broncos fared, their quarterback Drew Lock would complete 10 of his 24 passes, throwing 2 interceptions. Philip Lindsay would run for 101 yards and 23 carries on the ground. Tim Patrick would be their leading receiver with 101 yards and 4 receptions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Alexander Johnson would finish with 9 tackles on the day. Big game overall from the Denver Broncos, but it would be all field goals that won them this game, which would be a pretty wild feat, but they still beat the Patriots on all field goals. With this win, the Denver Broncos are now 2-3, 2-1 on the road, and with this loss, the Patriots are 2-3, and they're now 2-1 at home. Of course, this will be their first loss at home. And jumping to Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Steelers hosted their division rivals, the Cleveland Browns, who were able to destroy them 38-7. I'm looking at Cleveland. Baker Mayfield would throw for 119 yards, and throwing for a touchdown and 2 picks on the day. Through the air, Odell Beckham Jr., their elite receiver, would finish with 25 yards and 2 receptions. Austin Hooper would be their leading receiver with 52 yards on 5 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, B.J. Goodson would finish with 10 tackles, leading the team. He also had half of a sack. Big game for him. Myles Garrett, their elite defensive end, would finish with 4 tackles and a sack on the day as well for Cleveland. Looking at how the Pittsburgh Steelers fared, their quarterback Ben Roethlisberger would throw for 162 yards and a touchdown on the day. James Conner, their running back, would finish with 101 yards on 20 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Chase Claypool, their rookie phenom, would finish with 74 yards and 4 receptions. James Washington had 68 yards and 4 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Cameron Hayward finished with 8 tackles. Bud Dupree, their linebacker / defensive end from Kentucky, would finish with 4 tackles and 2 sacks on the day. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Minkah Fitzpatrick would finish with a pick 6 for the Steelers. And then Cameron Sutton would also finish with an interception as well. With this win, the Pittsburgh Steelers are one of the 2 teams that remain with a 5-0 record in the season. And with this loss, the Cleveland Browns now drop to 4-2. Jumping to Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Colts After being down 21 to nothing, I believe, in the second quarter to the Cincinnati Bengals, they were able to come back and beat them 31 to 27 after scoring 10 points in the fourth quarter to put them up. For the Cincinnati Bengals, the number one overall pick, Joe Burrow, would throw for 313 yards. He also threw a pick as well. On the ground, Joe Mixon had 54 yards and a touchdown. He also had 15 yards through the air on 2 receptions. Their leading receiver would be T. Higgins, who finished with 125 yards and 6 receptions. Their elite wide receiver, A.J. Green, would finish with 96 yards and 8 receptions as well. On the defensive side of the ball, Von Bell would lead the team in tackles. He had 9 of them on the day. Xavier Williams had a sack. Good game overall from the Bengals, but it would be the Colts who ended up coming from behind. And even Jesse Bates would get an interception for them. For the Colts, Phillip Rivers would throw for 371 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. Through the air, Marcus Johnson would be their leading receiver. He had 108 yards on 5 receptions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Khari Willis would finish with 10 tackles on the day, leading the team. DeForest Buckner from the 49ers would finish with 5 tackles and a sack as well. And looking at Julian Blackmon, he was able to get an interception, registered that one for the Colts. With this win, the Indianapolis Colts are now 4-2 in the AFC South, as the Cincinnati Bengals now drop to 1-4-1. As you remember, they did tie with the Eagles earlier in the season. Jumping to Jacksonville, the Jaguars hosted the Detroit Lions, and the Lions were able to get this win, beating them 34-16. For the Jaguars, Gardner Minshew II would go for 243 yards, a touchdown, and a pick on the day. Their leading receiver would be Keelan Cole Sr., who had 143 yards on 6 receptions. And then looking at how their defense fared, Joe Sherbert would lead the way with 10 tackles on the day. He had half of a tackle for loss. But like I said, not much going for Jacksonville, but Joe Sherbert would end up getting an interception as well to go along with his 10 tackles. He had a pretty good day. For the Detroit Lions, their quarterback Matt Stafford would throw for 223 yards with a touchdown and a pick. DeAndre Swift would be their leading runner on the night. He had 116 yards on 14 carries and 2 touchdowns. And then, of course, DeAndre Swift would have 7 yards and 3 receptions on the day, giving him 123 total yards of offense. Future Hall of Fame running back Adrian Peterson also finished with a touchdown, as he had 40 yards on 15 carries. Kenny Golladay would be the leading receiver on the day for the Detroit Lions. He had 105 yards on 4 receptions. And then Jeff Okudah would lead the team in tackles, the Detroit Lions' elite young cornerback. He had 8 tackles on the day. And then Duron Harmon would get the only interception of the day for the Detroit Lions. With this win, the Lions are 2-3 on the season, 2-1 on the road, and with this loss, the Jacksonville Jaguars are 1-5 on the season. They're now 1-2 at home. Speaking of the AFC South, now that we're on the Jaguars, the Tennessee Titans hosted the Houston Texans and were able to beat them 42-36 in overtime. Before I get to Derrick Henry's monster game, I'm going to get to the Texans. For them, their elite quarterback Deshaun Watson would complete 28 of his 37 passes, throwing for 335 yards and 4 touchdowns. He also had 26 yards on the ground on 4 carries. Of course, that would give him 361 total yards of offense. David Johnson, who I think finished with 2,000 yards one year for the Cardinals, he finished with 57 yards and 19 carries on the ground with a touchdown. He also had 12 yards on 1 reception to give him 69 total yards of offense with his 1 touchdown. Will Fuller V would be the leading receiver for the Houston Texans. He had 123 yards and 6 receptions and a touchdown. Tyrell Adams and Zach Cunningham will lead the team in tackles. They both had 8 of them on the night. Tyrell Adams would have a sack as well. Their goated defensive end, J.J. Watt, would finish with 4 tackles on the night with a sack and another whole tackle for loss. And then Bradley Roby would get the interception for the Texans. Looking at how the Titans are faring, their quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, he's been quite hot since the Titans have let him start. He completed 30 of his 41 passes with 364 yards for 4 touchdowns and an interception. Derrick Henry, the Titans' elite running back, would have 212 yards on 22 carries and 2 touchdowns, including the biggest run of the day. Through the air, Anthony Firkser would be the leading receiver for the Titans. He had 113 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. And their wide receiver, A.J. Brown, from Ole Miss, who would end up getting the game-tying touchdown in the fourth quarter. He'd have 56 yards on 5 receptions and 2 touchdowns on the day. And then Derrick Henry would also have 52 yards on 2 receptions to give him 264 yards of total offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Jayon Brown would lead the team with 10 tackles on the day. And then that would be a good win. They would, like I said, they would win in overtime. Derrick Henry would have a big run in overtime to get the Titans in scoring position. They eventually just won the game. With this win, the Tennessee Titans are now 5-0 on the season. They and the Pittsburgh Steelers are the only two teams in the AFC that are undefeated. And with this loss, the Houston Texans are officially 1-5 on the season. Jumping out to New York, the Giants hosted the Washington football team, were able to get their first win of the season, beating them 20-19. This is a game that came down to the wire. For the Washington football team, Kyle Allen would throw for 280 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Through the air, Terry McLaurin would be their leading receiver. He had 74 yards on 7 receptions for the team. And then Cole Holcomb and DeShazer Everett would lead the team in tackles. They both had 6 on the day. And then Kendall Fuller would get the interception on the day for the Washington football team. And for the New York Giants, Daniel Jones would throw for 112 yards for a touchdown and an interception. On the ground, he'd also run for 74 additional yards of his own. And then Devontae Freeman would also add 61 yards and 18 carries of his own. Darius Slayton was the leading receiver for the Giants. He had 41 yards and 2 receptions. He had a touchdown out of those 2 receptions. And then Blake Martinez would lead the team in tackles. He had 14 of them on the night. And then James Bradbury would get the only interception of the day, as Leonard Williams with 5 tackles also finished with a sack for the New York Giants. With this win, the Giants, like I said, are 1-5 on the season, just like the Washington football team. And then jumping really quickly out to Philly as we stay in the NFC East, the Philadelphia Eagles were able to host the Baltimore Ravens. They scored 20. The Baltimore Ravens, first off, held the Philadelphia Eagles they held them scoreless in the first half. They were winning 17-0 at halftime. The Eagles would score 22 points in the fourth quarter, and the Baltimore Ravens would still win, but the score would be 30-28 as the Philadelphia Eagles almost came back. I think it would be a failed 2-point conversion. That would be the end of them. But for them, Carson Wentz would throw for 213 yards. He completed 21 of his 40 pass attempts. He threw for 2 touchdowns, and then he would also run for 49 yards and an additional touchdown. That would give him 262 total yards of offense with 3 touchdowns. Miles Sanders would lead the way on the ground for the Eagles. He had 118 yards on 9 carries. He also had -6 yards on 1 reception to give him 112 total yards of offense on the day. Travis Fulgham would lead the team in receiving yards as he had 76 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. And then looking at their defensive side of the ball, Nathan Jerry would finish, and Alex Singleton would both finish with 9 tackles on the day. Brandon Graham would finish with 6 tackles, and he had 2 sacks on the day. Malik Jackson would have 4 tackles. One of them would be a sack, and the other he'd have 2.5 tackles for loss. Big game for the Eagles, but it just wasn't enough. For the Baltimore Ravens, the reigning 2019 NFL MVP, Lamar Jackson, would throw for 186 yards and a touchdown as he completed 16 of his 27 passes. He also ran for 108 yards and a touchdown on 9 carries. Of course, that would give him 294 total yards of offense. And then Gus Edwards would finish with another touchdown as he would finish with 26 yards and 14 carries and a touchdown. Marquise Hollywood Brown would be the leading receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. He had 57 yards on 4 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Marlon Humphrey would lead the team. He had 8 tackles. He even had a sack on the day. Calais Campbell, their big defensive end, standing at about 6'7", 6'8", would finish with 5 tackles on the day, 3 sacks on the day to help the Baltimore Ravens get their win. And with this win, they are now 5-1 on the season, 3-1 on the road, as the Eagles are now 1-4-1 on the season. They're 0-2-1 at home. And like I said, they tied with the Bengals. That's why they have the 1 tie. Jumping out to Carolina, the Panthers were able to host the Chicago Bears as the Bears were able to get the best of the Carolina Panthers, getting a good lead early, scoring in every quarter. The Carolina Panthers would get held to 6 until the fourth quarter. They'd score 10, but it just wouldn't be enough. For the Carolina Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater would throw for 216 yards as he threw for 2 picks on the day. He also ran for 48 yards. That would also give him 264 yards of offense, but he still wouldn't be able to create a touchdown. Mike Davis would have 52 yards and 18 carries with a touchdown. DJ Moore would be the leading receiver for the Panthers. He had 93 yards on 5 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Trey Boston would lead the team with 8 total tackles on the day. And then Jeremy Chin would get the interception for the Carolina Panthers. For the Chicago Bears, Nick Foles would throw for 198 yards and throw for a touchdown. He also ran for 4 yards and a touchdown to give him over 200 yards of offense and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, Allen Robinson would be the Bears' leading receiver. He had 53 yards on 5 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Akeem Hicks would recover a fumble, by the way, as he had 2 tackles on the day. Roquan Smith would lead the team with 12 tackles on the day. Khalil Mack, their elite defensive end, would finish with 4 tackles. He had a sack on the day. He also had an additional tackle for loss. Bilal Nichols also had a sack, along with Mario Edwards Jr. They'd have 4 sacks as a team, as Tashawn Gibson Sr. and DeAndre Houston Carson would have the 2 interceptions logged up for the Bears that day. With this win, the Chicago Bears are now 5-1 on the season, 3-1 on the road, as the Carolina Panthers are now 3-3 on the season. Jumping out to Miami, the Dolphins were able to completely blank the New York Jets to give them their 6th loss of the season. For the New York Jets, Joe Flacco would throw for 186 yards and a touchdown. Frank Gore, the Jets' future Hall of Fame running back, would finish with 46 yards on 11 carries. And then through the air, Brashad Perriman would be the team's leading receiver with 62 yards on 4 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Avery Williamson would lead the team in tackles. He had 11 of them on the day. Terrell Basham and Bryce Huff would have the 2 sacks of the day for the Jets. And then Brian Poole and Marcus May would log interceptions. They had 2 interceptions as a team, but they just weren't able to get it done. For the Miami Dolphins, Ryan Fitzpatrick would throw for 191 yards for 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. He also ran for 4 yards. Tua Tagovailoa, their young elite quarterback, would finish 2 for 2 as he only got 1 possession at the very end of the game. Naturally, they're not letting him start because, of course, Ryan Fitzpatrick is playing pretty well, and the Dolphins are 3-3 now. Myles Gaskin would finish with 91 yards on the ground on 18 carries for the Miami Dolphins. He also had 35 yards on 4 receptions. Of course, that would give him 126 total yards of offense. And then Adam Shaheen would finish with 51 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown for the Dolphins. On the defensive side of the ball, Eric Rowe would lead the team with 9 tackles. Emmanuel Ogbah would have 5 tackles on the day. He'd have 2 sacks. Christian Wilkins would have a sack as well. With this win, the Miami Dolphins are now 3-3 on the season as the New York Jets drop to 0-6. And jumping to the other afternoon game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to get the best of the Green Bay Packers, handing the Packers their first loss of the season, beating them 38-10. The Packers would score all 10 of their points in the first quarter. They finished the fourth quarter winning 10-0. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers would score 4 touchdowns in the second quarter, and then they scored 10 points in the third. That's how the scoring went. It was a very odd game, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were kind of putting it on in the second quarter where they just kind of didn't look back. But looking out to how this game fared for the Green Bay Packers, their goated quarterback Aaron Rodgers would complete 16 of his 35 pass attempts for 160 yards. He also ran for 14 yards to give him 174 yards on the ground. He threw 2 interceptions on the day. Not much going for this Green Bay Packers. Offense through the air, Devontae Adams would be their leading receiver. He had 61 yards and 6 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Chris Barnes would have 10 tackles on the day. And then looking at how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fared, their goated quarterback Tom Brady would complete 17 of his 27 pass attempts for 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, it would be Ronald Jones II leading the way. He had 113 yards on 23 carries and 2 touchdowns. And then, of course, Ronald Jones II would have 8 yards through the air to give him 121 yards of total offense. Rob Gronkowski, their tight end, who's going to be a future Hall of Famer, who played with Brady on the Patriots, he finished with 78 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. It was the first touchdown Brady threw Gronk in about a couple years. And then also their elite wide receiver, Mike Evans, would finish with 10 yards on 1 reception. He was only targeted twice. And then on the defense side of the ball, Devin White would be their leading tackler. He had 10 tackles on the day. He had a sack as well, with 3 tackles for loss. Levante David would finish with 8 tackles with a sack and a half. Jason Pierre-Paul would finish with 2 sacks. He'd have a sack or 6 tackles, and he also have a sack and a half on the day. And Ndamukong Suh's only tackle of the day would be a sack. They had 5 sacks as a team. With this win, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 4-2 on the season. They're 3-0 at home. And with this loss, the Green Bay Packers are officially 4-1 on the season, 2-1 on the road. And then last but not least, jumping into last night's football game, the San Francisco 49ers, last year's NFC champs, were able to beat their division rival, the Los Angeles Rams, 24-16, after scoring 21 of their points in the first first half. The Rams tried to come back, but it wasn't enough. For the Rams, their quarterback Jared Goff would complete 19 of his 38 passes, 50% completion percentage. He threw for 198 yards through the air as he ran for 10 yards to give him over 200 yards of total offense. He threw for 2 touchdowns and a pick. Darrell Henderson Jr. will be the leading rusher on the day as he finished with 88 yards on 14 carries. Tyler Higbee would be the leading receiver for the Rams. He had 56 yards on 3 receptions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Micah Kiser and John Johnson would both lead the team in tackles. They both had 13 of them on the day. Their goated defensive tackle, Aaron Donald, would finish with 2 tackles on the day as well. Looking at how the 49ers fared, their quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo would complete 23 of his 33 passes for 268 yards and 3 touchdowns. Raheem Mostert would finish with 65 yards on 17 carries on the day. And their tight end, George Kittle, would finish with 109 yards on 7 receptions and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Dre Greenlaw would finish with 8 total tackles on the day and no sacks as well. But Jason Verrett would finish with the only interception of the day, coming for the San Francisco 49ers. With this win, the San Francisco 49ers are officially 3-3 on the season. They're 1-3 at home. With this loss, the Los Angeles Rams are now 4-2. They're now 2-2 on the road as they remain undefeated at home. And then last but not least, looking forward to today's games because, of course, today is Monday. Looking to start off this game at 5 o'clock. It'll be the 4-1 Chiefs, the Chiefs that won the Super Bowl last year, led by elite quarterback Patrick Mahomes, against Josh Allen and the Bills, and Josh Allen has been putting together an amazing season. The Chiefs are 2-0 on the road as the Bills are 2-0 at home, as both teams are looking to get their 5th win in their 6th game this season. And following that at 8:15, it'll be the 3-2 Arizona Cardinals facing off against the 2-3 Dallas Cowboys on ESPN as Kyler Murray, the reigning NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year, looks to take on the Dallas Cowboys. And they've had a couple of impressive wins, a lot of games that went down to the wire. So I already know this is going to be a very interesting game. But that's everything I need to say. And with that said, it is Monday, October 19th, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims. I want to thank you once again for listening to all 27 minutes of this piece. I hope all is well, and once again, peace out.